Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file's being recorded for the June 2025 edition of Socialism for All, and in it we're going to be continuing our reading of an article series called Lavender and Red by Leslie Feinberg from 2005. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee at patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. There are links to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. Before we begin, we want to thank the Workers' World Party at workers.org for hosting this article series, which is under their copyright. And if you want to get caught up with the earlier parts of this series, we'll be beginning at part 30 in this video. Please see the playlist, which is linked in the video description. Alright, let's begin. Part 30. German Movement Inspired U.S. Organizing. The German homosexual emancipation movement inspired organizing in the U.S. too. As early as 1906 and 1907, spokespeople from the Scientific Humanitarian Committee traveled to New York to talk about their movement building. Anarchist Emma Goldman, who said she was influenced by the writings of German gay leader Magnus Hirschfeld as well as women prisoners, made homosexual freedom a theme of her 1915 lectures across the U.S. Male soldiers shipped overseas to Europe during World War I came into contact with the gay, trans, and lesbian movement in Germany. At least one GI became enthused about bringing that organizing back to the U.S. In December 1924, Henry Gerber founded the first known homosexual rights group in the United States, the Society for Human Rights. This early attempt to organize was solely male. Lesbian historian Lillian Faderman notes that, quote, by the 1920s there were already a few established communities of women who identified themselves as lesbian, in some astonishing places such as Salt Lake City as well as in more likely areas such as San Francisco, unquote. That's quoting from Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers. African-American lesbians, including cross-dressers, were part of the rising Harlem Renaissance, and although the widespread baiting from pundits and pulpits about the, quote, mannish women of the women's rights movement was meant to be a slur, lesbians were drawn to the struggle. But it wasn't until World War II, when large numbers of U.S. women were mobilized in the ranks of the military and in wartime industry, that lesbian organizing in its own name took hold. Inspired by the German struggle. Gerber was a Bavarian-born GI whose family had emigrated to the U.S. around 1913. He was institutionalized briefly in 1917 for being homosexual. During World War I, Gerber was forced to choose between joining the U.S. Army or being interned as a, quote, enemy alien. He chose the Army. He was later deployed to the Rhineland as part of the Army occupation force there from 1920 to 1923. He worked as a printer and proofreader in Koblenz. While there, Gerber was inspired by the German homosexual emancipation movement. He wrote, quote, in Koblenz on the Rhine, I had subscribed to German homophile magazines, and made several trips to Berlin, which was then not occupied by American forces. I had always bitterly felt the injustice with which my own American society accused the homosexual of, quote, immoral acts. What could be done about it, I thought. Unlike Germany, where the homosexual was partially organized and where sex legislation was uniform for the whole country, the United States was in a condition of chaos and misunderstanding concerning its sex laws, and no one was trying to unravel the tangle and bring relief to the abused, unquote. Gerber came back to Chicago determined to start organizing homosexuals. Quote, the beginning of all movements is necessarily small, he wrote. I was able to gather together a half dozen of my friends, and the Society for Human Rights became an actuality. Through a lawyer, our program was submitted to the Secretary of State at Springfield, and we were furnished with a state charter. No one seemed to have bothered to investigate our purpose, unquote. The group's statement of purpose in the incorporation documents reads in part, quote, to promote and to protect the interests of people who by reason of mental and physical abnormalities are abused and hindered in the legal pursuit of happiness which is guaranteed them by the Declaration of Independence, and to combat the public prejudices against them by dissemination of facts according to modern science among intellectuals of mature age, unquote. The name Society for Human Rights, he noted, was, quote, the same name used by the homosexuals of Germany for their work, unquote. Gerber was reportedly rebuffed by prominent sex reform advocates he approached, quote, I needed noted medical authorities to endorse us, but they usually refused to endanger their reputations, unquote. Gerber recalled, quote, the only support I got was from poor people. John, a preacher who earned his room and board by preaching brotherly love to small groups of African Americans, Al, an indigent laundry queen, and Ralph, whose job with the railroad was in jeopardy when his nature became known. These were the national officers of the Society for Human Rights Incorporated, unquote. The group, which consisted of about half a dozen people, concentrated their efforts on the state of Illinois. There, anal intercourse was the only prohibited sex act, punishable from 1 to 10 years in prison. This was not unusual. The penalty in Georgia for, quote, sodomy at that time was life behind bars. Quote, "It is hard to believe that Mother Nature needs our police to protect her from her creatures," Gerber bitterly observed. Busted. The society set out to organize homosexuals, create a series of lecture events, and publish a newsletter. Gerber quickly produced 2 issues of the first known homophile publication in the United States, Friendship and Freedom. The primary goal of the society, Gerber stressed, was to decriminalize same-sex acts in Illinois. That objective proved harder to achieve. In July 1925, police raided the homes of the group's leaders. They had no warrants for the arrests. Henry Gerber, Al Meininger, and the Reverend John T. Graves were jailed. A reporter from the Chicago Examiner was allowed to accompany the detective who arrested Gerber in his home. The newspaper ran a front-page story declaring "Strange Sex Cult Exposed." Gerber endured 3 trials that cost him his life savings of $800. The charges were finally dismissed. He lost his job. His bosses at the post office fired him for conduct unbecoming to a postal worker. Gerber concluded, quote, "That definitely meant the end of the Society for Human Rights," unquote. Gerber re-enlisted in the Army. While stationed on Governor's Island in New York, he wrote articles in homophile publications under a nom de plume. He briefly wrote for Chanticleer, a mimeographed 1934 gay publication. And throughout the 1930s, Gerber ran Contacts, a homosexual correspondence pen pals club that served as a national communication network for gay men. Quote, "When he folded Contacts Club in 1939, member Manuel Boyfrank pestered him to get something started, and he, Frank McCourt, Boyfrank, and others wrote one another for years arguing how to organize homosexuals." Jim Kepner recalled in his 1985 pamphlet, Gay Movement History and Goals, quote, "They never realized that their radically different views on the nature of homosexuals and of society left little chance for them to agree on how to improve the homosexual condition. Without common goals, they couldn't evolve clear or practical tactics," unquote. Kepner concluded, quote, "A Gerber friend who lacked the nerve to join SHR brought out young Harry Hay in Los Angeles' Pershing Square in 1930 and told him about the group, inspiring Harry to imitation. But to start a group, you need at least one other person, and it took Harry 20 years to find that other, the late famed fashion designer Rudy Gernreich," unquote. The seeds of the early homosexual rights movement took root. By the end of World War II, recalls Barry D. Adam, quote, "The first stirrings of movement activity in the United States appeared among recently demobilized men in the Veterans Benevolent Association in New York and among working women in Los Angeles. Both groups developed out of existing friendship networks and made no attempt to go public," unquote. That's from The Rise of a Gay and Lesbian Movement. In 1947 and 48, Lisa Ben, an anagram for lesbian, published 9 issues of a publication she titled Vice Versa, America's Gayest Magazine. Lisa Ben had come out as a lesbian in the World War II era. She moved from the small agricultural community in California, where she'd been born and raised, to Los Angeles in search of a job. There, she also found a women's boarding house where she, quote, "met for the first time lesbians who took her to gay bars and introduced her to other gay women," unquote. And in 1950, Harry Hay did start an organization, Mattachine. Hay's vision of organizing was much more like that of some of the radical leaders of the German homosexual emancipation movement, because Harry Hay was a communist. Part 31. Young Harry Hay and the Wobblies. The Mattachine movement for homosexual emancipation in the United States was initiated by a core group of 5 leftists in 1950 at the height of the anti-communist and anti-gay McCarthyite witch hunt. 2 of the founders were members of the Communist Party, CPUSA, another had been active in the party in the Midwest after the war, and the other 2 leftists could be described as fellow travelers. The short-lived Mattachine movement drew an estimated 5,000 homosexuals in California to its ranks in the early 1950s, and Will Roscoe noted, quote, "Its name, carrying the promise of freedom, spread throughout the United States and the world." It's quoting Radically Gay. The political beliefs and experience of the founding members were far from incidental to organizing for homosexual emancipation. That was particularly true for Harry Hay, the key figure in launching the Mattachine movement. Hay had spent more than 17 years in the CPUSA. He wasn't just a member, he had been a respected Marxist teacher and a tireless organizer. Communist politics, a Marxist worldview, a historical materialist vista of history, and immersion in the class struggle gave material shape to Hay's vision of homosexual emancipation. Ticket to the working class struggle. Hay had been born in England in 1912 with a silver spoon in his mouth. He spent his early years in Chile, where his father was a wealthy mining engineer employed by Anaconda Copper. The family returned to the U.S. in 1917, where he grew up in Southern California. Hay so loved theater and opera that at the end of his freshman year in high school, at the age of 13, his father sent him to labor for the summer in the hay fields of western Nevada to, quote, toughen him up. Hay worked alongside miners who did farm work in the summers. Many were Wobblies, members of the Industrial Workers of the World, whose ambition was to organize workers into one big union. And commenting, we have a number of IWW organizing manuals here on the channel. Continuing, those hay wagons became a school of Marxism for Hay. In his biography, The Trouble with Harry Hay, Stuart Timmins described, quote, among the greasy, thumb-worn pamphlets, Harry remembered Karl Marx's value, price, and profit, and wage labor and capital. Commenting, we have both of those available here on the channel as audiobooks. Continuing, by day, they drilled him in the principles of exploitation, organization, and unity. By campfire, they told him stories. Quote, I was immersed in the first great railroad strike of 1887, the Haymarket Massacre, and the dreadful Ludlow Massacre, where Rockefeller goons gunned down 14 women and children in the snow on Christmas Eve, 1913, unquote. Hay also recalled being chilled by the anti-gay attitudes that many workers, including Wobblies, had been societally imbued with and which remained unexamined and unchallenged. However, the Wobblies gave Hay an IWW card that was his ticket to work on a tramp steamer. The experience with these militant miners gave him more than that. Timmins summed up, quote, though he had already been earning money for several years, and the silver spoon of his infancy had long tarnished, he now had words to identify himself as a working-class kid. He played down any class rebellion on his part and said that his new politicization merely gave a theoretical basis for his personal hatred of his father's staunch conservatism. The Wobblies' praise for his honest toil strengthened this new political bond, and each winter he eagerly awaited the return of summer and their companionship, unquote. Hay's first bullseye. Hay's first gay experience was with someone who had ties to the much shorter-lived 1924 Society for Human Rights based in Chicago, whose founder, Henry Gerber, had been deeply inspired by contact with the German homosexual emancipation movement. Hay, who never lost his early love of theater, moved to Los Angeles, an urban magnet for many homosexuals, and became a struggling actor during the depths of the capitalist economic depression of the early 1930s. It was Will Geer, perhaps best remembered today as Grandpa Walton of the 1970s television series The Waltons, who first introduced Hay to the left-wing current in Los Angeles and to the Communist Party. Over coffee with Geer and Maud Allen, said Timmins, quote, they hashed over the anti-socialist Palmer raids made by the federal government in the 1920s, the Sacco and Vanzetti trials, and various strikes. Fascinating stuff to this young man, unquote. Geer and Hay helped organize demonstrations during these hard Depression years to support unemployed workers, exploited field laborers, and labor unions. They chained themselves to a lamppost at the old UCLA campus while distributing leaflets for the American League Against War and Fascism. One of the most life-altering demonstrations for Hay, which he reportedly loved to rehash, was in Bunker Hill in downtown Los Angeles. Says his biography, quote, the mill strike was an action called in 1933 by the wives and mothers of the poor and unemployed to make the government stop allowing surplus milk to be poured down the storm drains to keep the price up. They wanted it for the needy. A crowd of thousands turned out downtown in the shadow of the newly built City Hall, unquote. Hay saw police posted atop nearby buildings aiming their machine guns at the crowd. Cops charged, swinging their clubs at protesters' skulls. Quote, women were grabbing and shielding their children, and every so often, you would see someone go down with a bloody head. The police were being absolutely brutal, without provocation. I think they may have wanted to incite a riot, so they could clear the crowd, unquote. As he backed away from the police melee toward a bookstore, Harry grabbed one of the bricks used to keep stacks of newspapers from flying away in the breeze. Quote, I made no conscious decision. I just found myself heaving it and catching a policeman right in the temple. He slid off his horse and 100 faces turned to me in amazement. No one was more amazed than I. Always before, I had been the one who threw the ball like a sissy. This bull was my first bullseye ever, unquote. Timmins described what happened next. Quote, sympathizers murmuring in Yiddish, Portuguese, and English grabbed him. He heard, we've got to hide this kid before the cops get him. They guided him through a labyrinth of connected old 1880s tenement buildings. He was pushed through rooms that immigrant women and children rarely left, across catwalks and planks, up, hearing the occasional reassurance, everything's fine, just don't look down. Hay arrived at a living room in the slums filled with men. Presiding over them was Clarabelle. Hay heard the other men refer to Clarabelle, who was born male-bodied with the female pronoun. Clarabelle had henna'd hair and wore a peasant blouse slung low over one shoulder. Quote, Harry had heard of Clarabelle as one of the most powerful of the, quote, queen mothers, who traditionally oversaw the temperamental comings and goings in the district of town where they lived. Harry felt that such figures formed a regional network of salons among some pre-Stonewall gays, Timmons explained. Hay himself recalled, quote, Clarabelle controlled Bunker Hill and had at least a dozen lieutenants covering stations. One called the Fruit Tank. That was our nickname for the jail cell for queers. Clarabelle was legendary, a 1930s movie star Mary Boland type, who really knew how to pin a curl while giving an order. My dear, she said to me, we saw what you did, knocking that old cop off his high horse, and it should have been done years ago. We'll have to hide you, they'll be after you soon. Cup of coffee first? No time. They're already on their way. Unquote. Part 32. Harry Hay heard the siren song of revolution. Harry Hay, who had been living his life as a gay man as out as he could be, joined the Communist Party USA in 1934. At that time, the CPUSA barred openly gay and lesbian members. Particularly ideologically harmful was the formulation to, quote, justify such a membership rule, the view that homosexuality was a degeneracy that arose from a decadent economic system. That policy was indefensible, doing damage to homosexuals as well as to the revolutionary movement as a whole. This political stance did not arise out of a vacuum. While the Bolshevik Party under Lenin's leadership had abolished the Tsarist anti-homosexual law in 1917, by 1934, under a more politically conservative and bureaucratic grouping, an anti-homosexual law was back on the books in the USSR. There were homosexual members in the CPUSA, they just didn't say that they were. It would be wrong to glibly refer to this as a don't ask, don't tell policy. That phrase refers to the reign of terror the Pentagon, the military arm of the capitalist state, conducts against its own GIs. The CPUSA was nose to nose against that state. The party leadership may well have feared the opening for state repression the organization could face by having openly gay, lesbian and bisexual, and trans members. After all, the party was struggling in a capitalist country in which same-sex love was illegal. Tragically, however, the CPUSA's position on homosexual members helped to create a much greater political and state vulnerability. Within a decade, the right wing of the U.S. capitalist class would unleash a witch hunt to crush revolutionary resistance to its rule by equating communists with homosexuals, and the CPUSA's position weakened the struggle to politically answer and defend victims of the anti-communist and anti-gay witch hunt. In fairness, there was not as yet a historical materialist overview of the roots of state regulation of sexuality and gender expression. The greatest Marxist theoretical contributions had been to reveal the class basis of the oppression of women. It would be Harry Hay who would take that Marxist analysis further, to look at the origins of oppression based on homosexuality and what would today be called transgender and transsexuality. You might have to start it yourself. Hay thrived as a communist. He caught a glimpse of the future in his work. Hay described those experiences in the biography The Trouble with Harry Hay, written by Stuart Timmons. Hay recalled, quote, we were involved in organizing the unorganized. The CIO had a wide open field on the West Coast. Along with the waterfront, the newspaper guilds began to organize, as did the department stores, unquote. Hay and Will Geer continued doing agitprop theater, shorthand for short street dramas that taught political lessons while mobilizing audiences to take action. Hay defined it as a, quote, responsibility for keeping spirits high at picket lines and keeping attention focused at large meetings, unquote. Geer took Hay to Communist Party theory classes. Hay attended but reflected, quote, it was disorienting to sit there with urban people, mostly film workers, discussing rural worker models of Marxism, unquote. Geer discouraged Hay's talk of organizing a, quote, team of brothers. Hay recalled, quote, I said that I wanted to get a society of just us together. Bill argued that that was the theater, unquote. Only Maud Allen encouraged Hay's dream of organizing homosexuals. While Hay and Geer argued about the possibility, she interrupted that, quote, this was possible, but you might have to start it yourself, unquote. The experience that changed his life. Hay explained how the West Coast longshore workers' strike transformed him. The 1934 strike in San Francisco inspired all the maritime workers to shut down the waterfront. The militant action by longshore workers won the support of 120 local unions. The CPUSA sent Hay and Geer and many other organizers from Los Angeles to help the strikers. Hay and Geer collected food for the striking workers as they drove up the coast. In early July, bosses tried to bring scabs past the picket lines, igniting battles. Governor Frank Finley Merriam called out the state militia. This sparked the call by labor leaders for the July 1934 San Francisco general strike. Hay was there when troops were ordered to open fire on a crowd of more than 2,000 workers. He remembers a bullet whizzing past his left ear. 2 workers were shot dead, 85 more were hospitalized. Later, at the huge funeral procession for the 2 men, Hay remembered that, quote, a posse of dock workers knocked the bowlers off the heads of bankers who refused to show respect. It was pretty damn impressive, unquote. Quote, the strike was just something tremendous, Hay later told historian John D'Amelio. You couldn't have been a part of that and not have your life completely changed, unquote. He was 23 years old, and he was answering what he called the siren song of revolution. Hay in the thick of struggle. In 1935 and 1936, Hay was in the thick of the struggle. He took part in fundraisers and demonstrations against the rise of fascism in Spain and Germany, and in support of African American civil rights and union organizing. From 1936 to 1938, he worked on the End Poverty in California campaign, the Hollywood Writers' Mobilization, the American League Against War and Fascism, the Mobilization for Democracy, the Workers' Alliance of America, and Labor's Nonpartisan League. He was active in the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League, organized by Dorothy Parker in the spring of 1936. Supporters included Paul Muni and Boris Karloff. Biographer Stuart Timmins wrote, quote, "The Anti-Nazi League was a typical mass organization, which, while independent, relied heavily on leadership from the CPUSA and served to introduce sympathetic people to Marxist principles and to the party. The structure of the Mattachine Society, 14 years later, was strongly influenced by this model," unquote. Hay still frequented gay bars, describing his experiences this way, quote, "Gay life was not so much a life as an aggregate of cliques," unquote. Just as earth-shaking as the 1934 San Francisco general strike had been in changing his life, Hay explained how 3 years later a panoramic Marxist view transformed his thinking. Screenwriter Viola Brothers Shore invited Hay in late 1937 to a Marxist discussion group in the home of film director Frank Tuttle. This experience was, quote, "wildly exciting," Hay described. "Suddenly, it all made wonderful sense," unquote. Part 33. Harry Hay tried to close a chapter on his gayness. In 1938, Harry Hay, only a decade away from launching the first mass political movement for homosexual emancipation in the United States, married a woman comrade in the Communist Party USA. Since the CPUSA at that time did not allow openly homosexual members, it would be easy to jump to the conclusion that Hay, a member of the CPUSA, felt so isolated as a gay man that he married merely in order to hide his sexuality inside the organization. But Hay knew that he wasn't the only gay party member. He wrote, quote, "I knew a number of black and white men from the performing arts in the Communist Party who were gay, but the party didn't seem to suspect. I realized that since they weren't that unnoticeable, certain party people saw the necessity of tolerating and covering for them." That's quoting from Stuart Timmins' The Trouble with Harry Hay. Simply attributing the pressure toward heterosexual marriage to the CP's internal policy removes the historical context. Outside the party, homosexuality was illegal. State regulation of sexuality was enforced by police entrapment and raids, imprisonment, and institutionalization. As biographer Timmins succinctly summed up, quote, "Marriage was common for both male and female homosexuals of Harry's generation. The most famous modern homosexual, Oscar Wilde, was married with children. Matrimony, in one of Harry's more philosophical letters, seemed the casting couch for society," unquote. As historian Jim Kepner noted, quote, "In the 40s, for many gays who wanted to be socially productive, marriage was a necessity," unquote. While there were a few professions in which a gay man might remain unmarried, dance, design, dressmaking, those were not political hotspots of organizing. Harry Hay was an organizer who wanted to be in the thick of the working class struggle. If only she'd been a boy. In the late 1930s, Hay had talked to psychologist Dr. Saul Glass, while taking part in Glass's experiment that sought physiological markers for same-sex love. Hay was part of a control group whose blood and urine was compared to that of gay, bi, and trans prisoners held in the so-called fruit tank of the county jail. Hay lamented to Glass that he felt hopeless, quote, "in not being able to find a flower-faced boy who was a Marxist like me, who would stand with me in the class struggle against oppression," unquote. Glass's suggestion was creative within the confines of accommodation to oppression. Quote, "Maybe instead of a girlish boy, you're looking for a boyish girl," unquote. Hay recalled, quote, "He told me that all I needed to do to change my orientation was to deliberately close one book and open another," unquote. Shortly afterward, Hay was drawn to Anita Platke. She was a 6-foot-tall, strong-jawed, athletic woman described by some as boyish. And much to the dismay of Hay's well-to-do Catholic family, Platke was Jewish. Timmins wrote, quote, "Harry told Anita about his homosexual past. She assured him she understood, that she already knew several men who were that way. At least one of Anita's few boyfriends before Harry had also been gay," unquote. The two marched in the same demonstrations, walked the same picket lines, and shared the same hatred of oppression and the same commitment to the socialist future of humanity. So, in 1938, Harry Hay and Anita Platke exchanged wedding vows. At the request of the couple, the ceremony left out any God stuff. They remained married for 13 years. Hay said, quote, "Anita and I loved each other dearly and had a wonderful time doing anything together. We rarely quarreled because I usually understood her point of view. Most of her family and friends thought we were a perfect match. I never looked at another woman. But oh, the men," unquote. Timmons concluded, Harry once said with awkward sincerity, if she had been a boy, we would probably still be together, unquote. Learning communication skills. In 1939, the couple moved to New York and, as communists, became immersed in the movement there. In 1940, they were part of the many thousands who marched through the streets on May Day. Hay described, quote, everyone was singing the leftist anthem, the Bandiera Rosa Triunfra. It echoed through the canyons of the city. People were hanging out of windows singing. You'd really think the whole of Manhattan had signed up with the party, unquote. Hay was assigned to the Artists and Writers branch of the New York Communist Party. He became interim head of the New Theater League in 1941. This trade union theater staged actual shop floor battles that workers had fought in order to educate and organize. Harry explained that as workers successfully organized their shops into unions, quote, somebody would eventually say, geez, somebody ought to write a play about what we went through. If we told our story, other shops could learn from us, unquote. Hay organized a fundraising concert for the theater effort that brought the legendary blues singer Leadbelly, Aunt Molly Jackson, the famous voice of the Harlan County coal workers' struggle, and others to the Auto Workers Hall in Lower Manhattan. Hay taught acting to workers in unions, including the longshore, cooks and stewards, and bus drivers unions. Timmons concluded, quote, in their classes, people often reenacted actual confrontations with their bosses, living out the idea of shops learning from one another's struggles. So Harry joined the clan of theater teachers, from whose distinctive bag of communications tricks he would draw heavily in his future activism, unquote.